Hello, everyone. You should have all jumped from the virtual lobby into the main session. I'm hosting our webinar today on the power of potential. And without further ado, we are going to crack on. So let's just set the scene a little bit, if I may. Daniel, could you jump to the next slide, please? So we have Rachel Jordan-Evans, who I'll introduce a little bit later, from Sadara, really coming to join the webinar to talk about a client spotlight and their experience of looking at potential and how potential comes together. A little bit about Sadara, as you'll see from this slide, it's a collaborative of several different brands, all under one family umbrella of Sadara. And if you think about, who are Sadara, what do they do? You've probably encountered them unknowingly throughout your travels. They design and build airports. So if you've ever been to Dubai, they've built the airport in Dubai there. They're building a new airport in Dubai, but also hospitals and key infrastructure across the cities that we live, work, and play in. So that's a little bit about what Sadara does, and Rachel will bring their experience to life a little bit more. In terms of what we do at PeopleWise, we are a talent consultancy and specializing in these three areas. And really our premise is all around bringing psychology and science to business to help organizations that we work with make better, more informed people decisions. If you look at that, we do a lot of work around assessing potential, right? Really getting under the grips of that. And Daniel will explain quite a lot about that in today's session. And the use case can be for recruitment or it can be talent development, but it's really scientific in our approach, and you'll find out a lot more about that. And then we talk and do work with clients around developing leaders to make sure they've got the critical capabilities to succeed in today's world. And then we also look at how we drive performance through coaching, through sales intervention, and through transformation as well. So there's a very high level around what we do at PeopleWise. You will get the chance to speak to us throughout the session, and we'll let you know when that happens. Daniel, the next one, please. Two great speakers today, and we really do have great speakers. Daniel is the head of assessment at PeopleWise, so lots of experience around the assessment space, but in-depth behavioral scientists, occupational psychologists lens on what does this mean, how does it work. Daniel works with a whole breadth and depth of different clients across different sectors, so can really bring the practical application of how are we as PeopleWise bringing science to businesses. And he'll be talking through a lot of the power of potential. And then Rachel is from Sadara, as I mentioned, and we've worked with Rachel for a number of years now, and she will bring that client spotlight and really sharing what does this mean in business? What is the impact that this drives from a people perspective, but also a business perspective? So really looking forward to hearing more from them both. And now, Daniel, I will hand over to you so we can get into the meat.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. So welcome, everyone. It's always a great pleasure to be speaking at these events on a topic that we at PeopleWise are very passionate about, and that is potential. As we think about potential and the leaders we need for tomorrow and not just today, always in the forefront of our minds is the VUCA concept. Whilst it may not be a new concept to some of you, it should be ever present in its relevance to us as we seek to understand what potential means in this VUCA world. Our premise here today is simple. In this fast-changing, increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that we are operating in, organizations need to promote individuals who not only want to step up, but have the potential to step up. And that is the capabilities to succeed in what will be more complex roles with more challenging timelines, greater responsibilities, but also greater unpredictabilities. In other words, for organizations to grow and thrive in a VUCA world and nurture talent pipelines that will deliver their growth plans, they must first understand where their human potential sits, and secondly, they must understand how to develop it. The area of potential is quite a hotbed of debate, and there are two themes I would like to draw out today. The first is around skills versus capabilities, and the second is around performance versus potential. So, starting off with skills versus capabilities. Many publications we see today, and we're certainly seeing, for example, on LinkedIn by organizations in this space, are really shifting a focus from abilities and capabilities to a skills-based approach, to a skills-based hiring methodology, skills-based development, skills-based qualifications, and so on. We would challenge the wisdom of this focus and would go so far as to wonder if this is yet another HR fad that people are following without really thinking through and defining what this approach means and what impact this trend could have on their organization. Now, we're not suggesting that skills are not important. They absolutely are important. We know that, and we measure them ourselves as part of our solutions. However, our premise is that skills, defined here as the talent, knowledge, or expertise needed to perform a task or job, will not determine which talent are going to thrive in our fast-changing VUCA world, because it's less about skills as individuals progress to more complex roles. Skills are usually role dependent. So again, as individuals change to different roles, how relevant are they? And we also know that in this fast changing VUCA world, skills become outdated very quickly. And we can't imagine what skills we might need in the next 5 years. Psychological capabilities are not specific skills or knowledge, but instead are personal qualities that influence an individual's professional and personal success. Success in our eyes would be scenarios where your talent pipelines are full of people who are agile and adaptive, people who can learn fast and grow from their failures, people who will stick with a challenge and see it through rather than being defeated by it at its first hurdle, and people who will think long and hard about problems and how to solve them. Our research has repeatedly shown that people with such capabilities are well suited to handling the VUCA world, well suited to handling unpredictable environments and unfamiliar problems, where broader adaptability and creativity are required. So we argue that capabilities are much more important in understanding your talent pipelines. And that leads quite nicely onto the next debate, which has gone on for a number of years and a number of decades. And that is the debate around performance and potential. So many organizations have attempted to tackle this dilemma through the use of things like tools like the 9-box grid. But do organizations really understand what is meant by potential? What we're seeing is that organizations are still blurring the boundaries between performance and potential, or are simply ignoring potential altogether, often because they deem it too hard to define, and so then opt for the idea that performance is the key to understanding their talent and their leadership pipeline. Interesting data from the Corporate Leadership Council suggested that only 30% of identified high performers were also classified as high potential. Only 30%. So how are you identifying the other 70% of your high potentials? And this challenge was succinctly described by a famous researcher. Some of you may know him, some of you may not. And his name is Dr. Lawrence Peter. And he spoke about a concept more than 50 years ago, which I'm going to show you shortly in an interview that was done with him many, many moons ago. I'm going to play you that video, and I'm going to ask you afterwards what your thoughts are in this space. Okay. I'm going to apologize in advance for the dated language. We certainly have moved on since then. So Tom, if you can just do a thumbs up to let me know that everyone can hear the audio.
When I was a boy, I used to believe my parents and believe my teachers and that you should have respect for your elders and betters, and that the men upstairs knew what they were doing. And I was taught that the more I would know, the further I would go. So I stayed in school, I got a degree, eventually got a teaching certificate, I went out to teach. And the first school I taught in, the principal was primarily concerned that the children did not step on the rose beds. And education seemed to be the furthest thing from his mind. I saw teachers and administrators that seemed incompetent, and I started to question some of these ideas I had. And as I looked around me, I saw a sign on the door that said, "Emergency exit, authorized personnel only." I wondered who'd written that. But then later I saw another sign that said, "Emergency exit, not to be used under any circumstances." I went to a library looking for a book, and I noticed that all the books on pregnancy were stored on a shelf down by the floor. Probably the people that needed them most couldn't even see them. And then as I looked around, I saw that very often competent people, the competent individual, was promoted to something he couldn't do. I saw a competent mechanic where I used to take my car. He was terrific. He was very responsible, very precise, knew exactly what he was doing, so they made him foreman. Now he's no longer fixing cars, and he's trying to manage other mechanics. And he's very incompetent. He doesn't do this well. He's really a competent mechanic and an incompetent foreman. I also observed that a competent salesman, a man who is just terrific at dealing with people, with a great personality, very popular, well-liked, good at selling, personally. His sales were so good that they made him sales manager. And in this position, he'd found his level of incompetence because he was atrocious at the paperwork, atrocious at designing the territories for his salesmen. In other words, he was not good at dealing through other people or organizing other people. I saw competent engineers getting promoted to supervisory positions. They were great at dealing with things and incompetent at dealing with people. And over again, I saw this phenomenon, and I called it the Peter Principle. The Peter Principle states very simply that in any hierarchy, an employee tends to rise to his level of incompetence, and that's where he stays.
Okay, so very interesting to hear a view shared a number of decades ago, but seemingly still to play out today. So we'd like to hear from you now. So David is going to launch our poll, and we'd like to hear from you. How much are you seeing this play out in the organizations that you work for and work with? The key statement we're asking you to respond to: performance criteria is the key factor that you are seeing being used at organizations when promoting people. So to really indicate from strongly agree to strongly disagree, and also be ready to share. I'm going to ask some of you to share your views. So David, if we can open the poll, please. There we go. Poll is open. So please do get voting. So we've got some strongly disagrees, agree. Okay. About half of you have voted so far. Okay. Neither agree. We've got a neither agree nor disagree. Be ready to share because I'm going to ask you your views there.
We've
And
got a
that,
strongly disagree yet, Daniel, which is interesting.
no.
So
Oh, but don't tempt them. Don't
no, we advocate that. We advocate the conversation, right? And the disagreement is always good.
So we've got 16, 17, waiting for one more person to vote. Still deciding, or perhaps doesn't want to vote. That's also okay. So if we can close the poll there, David. Okay, so actually, we've got 71% of you on the call agreeing performance criteria is the key factor being used at organizations when promoting people. We've got 2 people that said neither agree nor disagree, and we've got 3 people that said strongly agree. I'm going to start with the people that said neither agree nor disagree. So of the 2 of you who indicated neither agree nor disagree, do either of you feel comfortable sharing your view and what you're seeing in the market at the moment?
Yes, I think I'm going to go there.
Thank you, Alex.
I think there are a couple of examples. One is a promotion within the same role. The other thing is a promotion into a manager's role. So clearly, if it is a promotion within the same role, someone has much better proficiency, then they can go into the next level. The skills are there, the needs are there. I think in promoting into management, from my perspective, it is as we saw in the video, it's a different thing. You're not dealing now with the proficiency of the job itself. You need leadership, coaching, sponsorship, like all of the above. It is true that sometimes people see management as a natural progression in the career. And it is true that in many cases, the person that knows how to do the work better tends to get the chance. But that's why I put I was in between both.
Fair enough. And thank you for sharing your view, Alex. So just to bring in some insights there, people being promoted based on proficiency, because it almost feels like the next natural progression. But the other important point you note there, Alex, is around sort of those leadership capabilities, those management capabilities. Where are those coming from? How are people expected to develop those? They've never operated in that space before. Thank you, Alex. What about those who indicated strongly agree? So we had 3 people there. Anyone like to share an example of what they've seen play out at the moment of those people who indicated strongly agree? No. What about those who voted agree? Got 12 people sitting there. Who would like to share what they're seeing play out in the market at the moment, particularly in this space in using performance criteria to promote people?
I'm happy to share if nobody else
Thank you, Jackie.
wants to. Yeah, so my observation is that even when we've included other aspects into potential, like various criteria around aspiration, agility, the sorts of things you're talking about in terms of ability to deal with a VUCA world, all that kind of stuff. Engagement, likelihood that they're going to stay, their drive, their ability to deal in more complex situations and do more with less, all of that sort of thing. Even when we've introduced those sorts of criteria for potential, I think managers find that difficult to evaluate and get their head around. I think they're used to managing and understanding performance and outputs in quite simplistic ways.
Yeah. Thank you, Jackie. And I didn't pay Jackie to say that. It actually leads quite nicely into really bringing this to really summarizing it. Not only are a number of organizations reverting to performance because either there's too many criteria, aspirations, engagement, flight risk, etc., too many criteria, so we'll revert back to performance. Sometimes it's because there are not enough criteria, so we'll revert back to performance. Sometimes it's because those criteria are not transparent, so people go back to what they're used to doing. Managers go back to what they're used to doing. So often people go back to what they're used to and what they perceive as something that's easy to quantify, what they perceive as reliable, and that is performance. Regardless of the reason, what we are seeing is that organizations are doing this far too often, and the research supports that. So despite the concept being described by Dr. Peter nearly 5 decades ago, organizations are still getting it wrong. They're still relying on past performance to determine who will advance into more complex leadership positions. The argument continues that it's only logical, we heard from Alex, it's only logical that if the person has performed well in the previous role, and this is a natural succession, they will perform equally well in a new, more senior role. Now, research is showing 74% of organizations are identifying high potentials via performance appraisal, so using potential. 70% of those high performers are not high potentials. It talks to that statistic earlier. They're only identifying 30% of their high potentials. 50% of new leaders are failing on the job. One could argue because they're not equipped. They don't have the capabilities to perform in that role. And 90% of high performers struggling with higher levels of responsibility. What are the costs of using this performance-based promotion methodology? The costs of a poor hire, I'm sure a number of you work in this space, so you know this, but the costs of one poor hire or promotion is estimated to be up to 150% of an incumbent's annual salary. And at a macro level, in the UK alone, what we're finding is that poor management really costs the UK alone approximately £85 billion in lost productivity due to poor leadership. So if assessing performance is not enough, where to from here? And the whole purpose of our session today is to reimagine potential and redefine what potential means for you and for the organizations that you work with by looking at other capabilities, not just skills, knowledge, and experience. Who would like to have a go at how you currently define potential? What is potential for you?
I think it's how far someone can get. What's the potential? Or like in a particular role, what's the maximum that they can do?
Thank you, Alex.
Even they think it or not. They may not believe that they can get there, but that's the potential.
Okay, so whether aware or not, how far they can get, what is their maximum? And thank you for being bold, Alex, and speaking up. Who else would like to share their definition of potential? No takers? Well, we'll share with you then the definition based on the Oxford Dictionary. And potential is said to be the qualities or the abilities that may be developed and lead to future success or usefulness. This definition is not that different from how we define potential, but what we know also often is that people really struggle to define it. So we're going to try and provide some insight in that space. As we start to provide some insight into potential and a model for potential, I just want to take you back and walk you through our journey in this space. And it really all began over 2 decades ago with our founder at PeopleWise, Dr. Belinda Board, who was looking at judges' work on core self-evaluations and the idea that those who can draw more effectively on inner capabilities, such as a positive mindset, do better in organizations. And that got Belinda thinking about leadership and potential, and it got PeopleWise thinking about leadership and potential, and could we understand those who succeed in going up the hierarchy of an organization in a similar way? And was it developable? Whilst most of the leadership assessment tools on the planet then and today are very much trait-based, particularly around personality, we were interested in looking at state-based capabilities. In other words, capabilities that are malleable, things that could be developed. And we partnered with a number of universities and organizations to trial those capabilities that we researched to be critical for success. And this led to the development of an assessment called PsyCap 7, which is today known as PsyCap Potential. So we developed PsyCap Potential, which is hosted on our very own talent analytics platform. We continued to test and validate the assessment. For those of you who are oxites on the call, you know how important that is. We built out a global norm group, ultimately culminating in the gold standard of assessment, and that is our registration of our assessment with the British Psychological Society. We continued, that wasn't enough for us, we continued then to build out additional languages, additional norm groups, really leading up to where we are today, and that is sharing this assessment and what it measures with you. And that leads us quite nicely on to, drumroll, our model of potential. So the PeopleWise model of potential is defined as an individual's positive psychological state that is characterized by having the mental agility to study, analyze, understand new problems and situations, the emotional agility to be personally and interpersonally effective, confidence to take on and put in the necessary effort to succeed at new and challenging tasks, the resilience to bounce back and even grow when faced with challenges and adversities, and finally, the drive to strive for success and pursue goals. So there are 5 key psychological capabilities on the inside, as I've just described: mental agility, emotional agility, confidence, resilience, and drive. And you then see the behavioral manifestations of those psychological capabilities. So for mental agility, it's really then the observable way that people think. For emotional agility, how do people engage? For confidence, how do people lead? Resilience, what do you do to really embrace change, adapt to change? And drive, how do people really strive for success and perform in the workplace? The first capability, just to talk you through a little bit more around each of them, our first capability is mental agility. And this is really looking at how well one is able to sift between relevant and irrelevant information to make effective decisions, particularly under pressure. So we're looking at how one problem solves. We're looking at how comfortable people are operating in the VUCA world, in that complexity and ambiguity, and how flexible individuals are in reviewing their thinking in light of new relevant information. Important point to bring in here under mental agility is we look at both cognitive reasoning. There is a cognitive reasoning component to this, and we also bring in then aspects of personality, state-based personality. Emotional agility is the second factor or capability, and this is about how individuals connect and drive results through others. So through the insight into oneself and others, how people adapt based on that insight and those reflections, and really the degree to which people have core guiding values or principles that drive their behavior, allowing them to engage in a consistent way. So bringing these all together to collaborate and build positive relationships in the workplace. So that is emotional agility. Confidence, this is really around having belief in oneself and the value that one can add, enabling an individual to be self-assured and to draw on this to perform in both familiar and challenging contexts. We have self-regard, self-efficacy, and stance here. And self-regard is really around those core self-evaluations. Self-efficacy is around one's belief in their ability to succeed in challenging and new environments outside their comfort zone. And finally, we have stance, and that is about one sharing an opinion, sharing a viewpoint, even if it is unpopular or controversial. Resilience. Resilience is the fourth factor, and here we're really looking at how an individual responds in the volatile, complex, and ambiguous environments they are faced with. How they increasingly adapt to really harness pressure and setbacks to their advantage. So it's really using determination to overcome obstacles, maintaining an optimistic outlook, and maintaining their emotions, maintaining their composure under pressure. And the final capability we have is drive. And drive is the fifth and final factor of the model. It's really linked to an individual's core motivations to succeed at work. What a lot of people describe it as is almost the engine, the fuel in the engine of leadership potential. So individuals high in drive strive to succeed and are willing to do so for a sense of accomplishment and achievement to really realize personal and professional goals. So it's having a strong personal vision, it's putting in place goals to get there, and being proactive in driving people and projects forward at pace. So this is our model of leadership potential, known as VUCA potential, and it's part of our wider perspectives framework on talent and leadership assessment. So I'm now going to talk you through really how we identify and develop potential before we hand over to Rachel. And we've really drawn on key principles of stratified systems theory by Elliot Jacques and Drotter's leadership pipeline. And we've used those two models to develop our leadership transition model. And we can see that as individuals move up the leadership hierarchy from leading self to leading the enterprise, we know roles become increasingly strategic, increasingly ambiguous, require wider decision-making latitude, demand more scenario planning, systems thinking, and the ability to generate novel ways of operating. In short, there's an increased need for agility and adaptive behaviors the more a person moves from generating value in the present at leading self all the way through to generating value for the future at a leading the enterprise level. So we've developed our assessment of potential, looking at an individual's internal resources to better assess and develop leadership potential, not just for today, but for tomorrow as well. And this enables organizations to select, promote, and develop individuals based on those internal resources. Now, I can talk to you about the validity and reliability of the assessment until I'm blue in the face, but better yet, we have one of our clients here today, Rachel Jordan Evans, who I've worked with for the last 5 years, but has worked with PeopleWise for a lot longer. So I'm now going to hand over to Rachel Jordan Evans to talk you through her experience working with a number of different organizations using our model of potential. Rachel, over to you.
Lovely, thank you, Daniel. And hello to everybody. It's great to be here. I want to sort of share an example that'll bring the use of the instruments to life, I guess. Currently, I work for Sadara, but I worked also for a company called Johnson Controls quite some time ago. And I want to give you an example from when I worked there, because it really shows the most impactful example I've got of using assessment instruments to assess potential. So Johnson Controls, the part I worked for was the facility management part, and we managed the facilities of hundreds of buildings around the world for the likes of Cisco, CSC, Exxon, those kinds of organisations, BBC. And if you know anything about facilities management, people tend to fall into facilities management either through, I don't know, cleaning services or maintenance services. They tend to be people who've worked their way up through the ranks, as it were. And we had a number of really large contracts ranging from anywhere from $50 million to sort of $350 million. And what we noticed was that we were starting to either lose clients, or we were having clients ask for our account directors to be removed, or we weren't winning new business. And after a lot of navel dwelling, I think that's the term, we came to the very clear conclusion that we had been promoting people into these account director roles because they'd always been good at facilities management. They'd always been, as they'd progressed, they'd continue to progress and progress and progress. But they were dyed-in-the-wool facility management leadership. But what we found was that when they took that step into that real strategic account director role, things started to go awry. And so we started to really look at what makes a good account director, and how can we really synthesize down those key elements so that when we're appointing or promoting internally, or we're hiring externally, we can try and mitigate as much risk as possible. To Jackie's point, who spoke earlier, you know, people pretty much do what they've always done, and so they would say to us, well, he's a really good guy, you know, I get on really well with him, the client loves him, that kind of thing. And so it took us 2 years actually before we really had the organization convinced around using SciCap. What I understood was that we needed to have people who could think strategically, could build really strong client relationships, moving it from a transactional kind of relationship to a trusted advisor. And so we focused on, in the SciCap, for example, mental agility and emotional agility, probably more than anything at the time. We introduced the assessment, and at first, obviously, they were just entertaining, you know, what's the word? Not entertaining me, humouring me, I think, the organisation. By the time we'd come to the end of 2 years, it was unequivocal. We were able to demonstrate that an individual may have a fantastic track record, and it's not to negate from that, but that actually when you're starting to look at moving them up into account director role, these kinds of attributes that we were able to measure were a greater indicator of someone's future success in a promotional role. And to give you a very live example of that, we had the contract for the BBC, and to give you an understanding of the order of magnitude in terms of the liability we had, if the BBC went down through transmission, which we were responsible for all of the hard and soft services for the BBC, we would be fined £1 million and a minute for every minute that the BBC was down. So our mind was very focused on making sure that that didn't happen. And our account director at the time had decided he wanted to move on. I think he was moving external. And so we had a person underneath him who was the account director number 2. And the BBC client had said to us unequivocally, we want that person to take over the account director role. And the chief people officer at the time rang me and said, look, you know, the BBC want him to be promoted into that role. We know from the feedback that you've given us that that might be a risk. And I said, look, I understand why the BBC like him. You know, he delivers over and over again. He has great relationships with people. You know, people find him approachable, easy to work with, not a blocker, that kind of thing. I said, but I'm telling you now, if you appoint him into this role, we are making a mistake. And I understand that the client thinks that that's the right thing to do, but it's our role to help the client to understand why that's not the right decision. I wasn't listened to, I think because the client was emphatic about that. And 8 months later, we lost that contract. I can say hand on heart, if we'd have followed our own compelling argument in terms of the data we had, on that individual, we would not have lost that contract. And bear in mind, the client was the one who chose that person. The client was the one who wanted that person in that role. And it was the client's rejection of him in that role, because that person wasn't a strategic thinker, wasn't able to put themselves in a position where they were a real, true industry trusted advisor. Who, let's face it, when you're an account director for a facilities management team, you're there to just make your client look good. But he wasn't able to really pull together the essential tenets of what being a trusted advisor and therefore making your client looks good was, because he didn't have that potential. And so, having deployed it in Johnson Controls, I then went on to deploy it into 2 other roles. And I had the same experience, Jackie, that I had at Johnson Controls. It took me long, 1.5 years. It was in the second role, and then 1.5 years here, for people to really understand the true power of it. Where now no hiring manager will make a key appointment without going through the PsyCap assessment, because it is such a reliable predictor of potential. You don't negate what people have achieved in their careers, but what this does is help you to really filter out and remove the noise of great performance from future potential. Daniel, I don't know if I've missed anything that I normally would talk about at this juncture.
No, I think you've done a great job. Thank you, Rachel. And what we'll also do, just to let you know, there'll be an opportunity shortly to also ask questions that you have of Rachel in using the tool, but also questions to us, maybe around the assessment. And
Daniel, maybe if I can jump in. I had a great question privately to me, so I just thought I'll ask that now, as it seems a good moment. It's to both of you, really, and it was around, Rachel, you were talking about how it took you time to convince the business and persuade the business. And Daniel, you talked about how it was to measure on performance is easy. And the question was around, if someone's at the beginning stages of this, how do they look to persuade the business? How do they go about creating that business case?
Daniel,
Rachel, go ahead. Yeah, I'll come in afterwards.
So how I did it at Johnson Controls was, number one, stating the obvious. What we're doing right now is not working, is it? And there was, no one could argue with that. We were hemorrhaging contracts. And so what I did was then start to use it in some certain test cases. So we had been using it initially for internal development centres. And so I had some data from that. In terms of individuals. And we had a particular instance where we needed an account director for Microsoft, and Microsoft was at the time, I think, about 50 million in terms of revenue. And we had what looked like, on the face of it, an unlikely candidate internally. And so what I did was, I presented the case in terms of their potential. I've done a lot of work with the instrument, as you can understand, and so I painted the picture of this person's potential and how they could get us to a position with a client where we would be able to grow that business. And they appointed. They took a punt on me, for want of a better word, and they appointed. We grew that account to, I think, 150 million by appointing that lady into that role. And that was the beginning. And so at first they're like, okay, maybe there's something in this. And so then I would start to say, okay, let's use it for internal appointments, first of all, because we know the person, and then we can track their future progress. And so we started to use it for just key appointments where I would convince the hiring manager, and I'm talking about senior appointments here. I would convince them, you can't afford to fail, can you? We've got nothing to lose by utilising this instrument and everything to potentially gain. It just gives you another data point from which to make your decision. And so I did that with a couple of really key appointments, and those people became very successful in what they were doing. We then were able to start to use it for external appointments as well. And so the norm groups, I'm assuming all of you know what a norm group is. And so we started to build up our own norm group, actually. I think a norm group, statistically, and Daniel will correct me or not, you have to have at least 100. We had in excess of 200, 250 assessments that we were able to unequivocally show that people who performed well across the dimensions that we talked about were unequivocally more successful in their roles. And actually, one thing I haven't spoken about before is we knew that we had done the right thing after 2 years because one of our competitors was going through an enormously, what's the word? Oh my God, what's the word? Aggressive growth strategy. And they literally, one by one, handpicked off every single one of our high potentials, the ones that had seen progressive and accelerated growth. We were also able to show that people were promoted 2 times faster if they had performed well in those assessments than those who hadn't performed well in those assessments. So that was a really long way of answering. I would take a couple of particular roles and just convince them that they got nothing to lose and everything to gain, and start to snowball it from there. Daniel, anything you want to add?
Thanks, Rachel. So yeah, sometimes the case for change is really clear. So either organizational performance is plummeting or you're hemorrhaging staff members, but sometimes there isn't enough of a case for change. And that's often where a number of our stakeholders sit in organizations and need a little bit of support. So to Rachel's point, sometimes we do a pilot and that then shows its value in terms of face validity, in terms of value into the business. And people often start off with using it for development purposes, really to test it out, and then start to use it for recruitment or selection purposes. But we can support you. It's not an unusual challenge.
Daniel, Jackie's asked a question, and you are the most qualified person to answer this.
Yes.
Are you saying the factors in the model are state-based and developable?
That's correct. So the capabilities are state-based. They're shown to be a lot more malleable than personality traits because they are grounded in different theoretical underpinnings. It is not grounded in the big 5 factor model of personality, which a number of trait-based assessments are.
Sorry, Daniel, just to your point about development, it's absolutely right that one way of doing this is to use it for development purposes, because if you explain the results competently to your managers, your leadership who are assessing maybe the leadership below, the insights that come from it are incredible. The leadership will start to go, that's why they're like that, or that's why they do that. So that builds real credibility with your managers or your leaders ahead of you using it for recruitment, for example.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. So just to sum up before we hand over for additional questions, so we know the case for change is clear, which is why we're doing the session today. Performance is not reliably predicting potential, but PsyCap potential does. So it is a holistic assessment looking at both cognitive reasoning or ability as well as capabilities. It is state-based. The question Jackie asked, it is state-based, not trait-based. It is certified with the BPS, and we have a number of different languages and norm groups available on the assessment. The only other thing I wanted to share with you today is pulsing. And the reason we thought it would be apt to share with you today is because often people do an assessment once off and they don't sustain the shift. They don't track the shift that individuals make post the assessment. That is something we do. So we have an app and we've developed our behavioral pulsing. And this is really a follow-up post-assessment or a leadership development program to really measure and track shift. It allows individuals to get real-time feedback on how they're doing against the capabilities they've chosen to pulse on. So that is it from me. I'm going to hand you over back to Tom for Q&A.
Great, thank you, Daniel and Rachel, and really it's a open session now for anyone on the line that would like to ask a question. A couple have come through and I'd shared some already. So if you've got a question, now is your time to jump in and ask that. I had another one, Daniel, that came through to me as you and Rachel were talking there, talking about levels of leadership and experience. You know, what level is PsyCat pitched at? What's the question?
Yeah. So PsyCat potential can be used right at a leading self-level individual contributor, all the way through to CEOs of complex businesses, and we have experience at both of those levels. Not only is the assessment appropriate, but we have different norm groups then based on the level that individuals are operating at.
Yeah, super. Okay, thank you for that. I had another one that was about reports. If they could just share a little bit more about the different types of reports that come out.
Of course. So we do have a number of different reports based on the context or the reason you're using the assessment. So I would say our most popular report used is our individual development report. It's approximately 25 pages, and it is a comprehensive development guide for an individual post an assessment that really highlights strengths and development areas against those 5 capabilities and the sub-capabilities that sit underneath them. And it is tailored, so the development suggestions are really tailored based on the individual scores. We also have, for more of a selection and promotion context, we have something called interview insights. So that will give you a good summary of the scores, and it will also then give you an interview guide where you can then ask certain questions. We give you those questions based on the individual scores.
So one assessment, multiple different use cases where it can be used, whether it's developmental, recruitment, interviewing, promotion. So again, using the data aligned to that use case.
Correct. Thank you, Tom.
Super. Jackie sent another one. Thank you, Jackie. So Jackie's asking about behaviors. Is it the behaviors or the psychological states that are developable? So it may be quite interesting just to talk about the difference of behaviors and the psychological capabilities, Daniel, just to clear that up.
Of course. So we have psychological capabilities, and then we have behavioral capabilities. The psychological capabilities are much more internal resources. They tend to be less observable, and they are developable based on the fact that we're looking at states. When we're looking at behaviors or behavioral capabilities, which we assess as well, but in a different way through like a 360, for example, you're looking there at more observable characteristics. You would tend to be able to rate someone on some of those characteristics.
And
So
can I just pick up on that then? So
yes.
I'm just intrigued as to how the model and the development side of it works. So interestingly, you've said that the psychological capabilities can be developed, I suppose, can change over time. But does it work back and forth, if you like? So if one were to focus on developing, for example, how somebody engages with other people, is that likely to have a positive impact on their emotional, psychological capability?
It's a good question, Jackie. It could do, because one could argue that through a level of self-awareness, even if it is a more behavioral capability, if it links back to one of the psychological, they could start to develop that inadvertently. I think the difference is the way that is measured through PsyCap is standardized. The way that people tend to do it from a behavioral perspective can be quite varied. And we know through a number of the 360s that we've reviewed and amended, often those 360 items are not as effective as they could be at really sort of drilling down to the main development point they're looking to develop. So, yeah.
And so, sorry, if I can just follow up on that. So are you suggesting then that when you talk about these things being developed, I suppose I'm looking at this from a very practical perspective, really. If you're looking at development, are you suggesting that you focus on the behaviors which can be observed and developing the behaviors, or are you suggesting that actually you get more impact if the developmental work is around the psychological capability?
So we would suggest the development work around the psychological capabilities, because those are more enduring than the behavior. The behaviors are really talking back to those skills, knowledge, experience that can be outdated quite quickly, whereas the psychological capabilities are giving you a bit of a benchmark on trial and tested capabilities. So we would suggest focusing on the psychological capabilities, and that too will then show some growth on the behavioral capabilities potentially as well.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackie.
Super. There's been one more question that you may want to give to me, Daniel, but we'll see. Someone's asked about the costs and the commercials behind that. So maybe I can just talk to that, and it's very simple and straightforward. It comes down to obviously what the use case is, what the output is you're trying to achieve, and how many people are in scope. We always operate a really clear approach here and a partnership-led approach. So, for example, if we're using a developmental use case, I would take SciCap potential as maybe along with a number of other people. A report would be generated, the one Daniel talked about, the developmental one's very, very rich in data. So self-awareness and self-reflection opportunities. And we unpack that through the power of feedback, individually or as a group, and we can do that as people-wise, or we sometimes will accredit the client where they can then do the feedback themselves. So there's cost control around that, and then that's where you get those development needs being driven forward. So all depends on the use case, but very simple around how it actually works. And if anyone's got any questions with that, we'll follow up separately and align to your context and your use case and share how that comes together. Daniel, don't know if there's anything you'd want to add to that question.
I think, Tom, you've covered it. But also, like we did with the face-to-face event, we are offering people who joined the session today the opportunity to do SciCap Potential. And Tom will reach out to you separately if that's something you're interested in doing.
Yes, so experiencing the experience, as I call it, is always important. So we'll let you do that if you're interested. You can actually take the assessment and experience what that's like, and then see if we can book you in with one of the behavioral scientists to unpack and unpick what that means. And I think that's the real value of the assessment. It's that data and insight and so what around how you can develop those capabilities moving forward. Well, we're right on time now.
Tom, I was just going to say, and if anybody wants to reach out to me to understand in a bit more detail how I've used it in various different jobs and various different roles, or just kick around their thinking, I'm more than happy.
Super. Thank you for that, Rachel. That's always good. And that's the whole power of this, right? Connecting like-minded peers that are looking at, people, potential, performance, and the right type of outcomes. So we're right on time. We will send a summary of some of the slides that we've shared. That will come from me later today. And if anyone would like to have another conversation to go a little bit deeper into SciCap and how that fits into your use case and context, very happy to talk you through that. Other than that, thank you for everyone who's joined us over lunchtime in the UK at least, and EMEA. Thank you very much, Daniel, for sharing your insights and expertise around the power of potential and explaining our model and the SciCap potential assessment. And likewise, Rachel, thank you very much for sharing the really great examples you have of where and how this can play out within organizations. And I think it's the impact of not doing it really resonated with me, and the impact of doing it. And we saw from your examples that it impacts business results, right, and financials and clients and revenue. So there is a big impact here around business. So we will wrap it up here. Thanks to everyone for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays.
Thank you, everyone. Good to meet you.